The winter sky over Charlotte shimmered with gold and grey, the city's glass towers mirroring the chill that came with Christmas week. From the 31st floor of his penthouse, James Callahan sat alone in a designer leather chair, sipping espresso that had long gone cold. Outside, holiday lights twinkled in neat rows along the boulevard. Couples walked hand in hand beneath glowing wreaths, and music spilled from store speakers. Inside, silence. James glanced at the untouched second espresso cup on the table across from him. Habit. There was never anyone there to drink it, but he still poured too. Maybe he liked the illusion. He set the cup down with a quiet clink and rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. The headline of the article he had started 2 hours ago hadn't moved past its first 5 words. Why holidays are just... He couldn't finish it. Not honestly anyway. Not without admitting something he never said aloud. He hated the holidays. He hated how everyone suddenly became someone else, smiling wider, talking louder, pretending nothing was broken in their lives. James didn't pretend. He didn't need to. His life was perfect after all, wasn't it? A voice from the hallway broke the quiet. "Mr. Callahan." Rosa stepped into view, carrying her usual grace in a navy sweater and dark jeans. She was the only constant in his ever-changing world. The one person who never asked for anything, but gave him everything that made this place feel like home. He glanced at her without moving. "You heading out soon?" Rosa nodded. "After I finish the tree, yes. Virginia and the girls are waiting." James looked toward the corner of the room where the tall pine tree stood, untouched except for a box of unopened ornaments. He had told Rosa to go ahead without it, that he'd be gone anyway. She stepped closer. "Have you decided where you're going?" He leaned back in the chair, stretching his long frame. "Aspen was the plan, but Doug's doing some loud yacht thing in Miami now." A pause. "I might just stay here." She raised an eyebrow. "Alone?" "It's not new." Rosa didn't respond right away. She adjusted the corner of a throw pillow on the couch, more out of habit than need. Then, almost casually, she said, "You know, Virginia's cooking this year. She's terrible at turkey, but her pecan pie might convert you." James smirked. "You inviting me to your place?" Rosa didn't smile back. She just looked at him, gentle but serious. "I'm saying, it's quieter up there. Simple. You might like it more than you think." He chuckled under his breath. "You mean I'd like being crammed into a mountain cabin with 3 wild children and 0 privacy?" She finally smiled. Probably not, but you might like being seen." That landed. He didn't reply. Rosa gathered her coat and keys without pressing further. Just before leaving, she turned and added, "If you change your mind, we'll have a chair for you. Even if it's a folding one." The door clicked softly behind her. James stared at the empty espresso cup again. He spent the rest of the day bouncing between distractions, answering emails no one cared about, clicking through streaming services without choosing a movie, scrolling past holiday posts of fake smiles and captioned gratitude. By evening, the condo felt colder, bigger. He stood at the massive window, watching the city turn its lights on like a stage show. Somewhere across town, people were sitting down to dinner, telling stories, laughing badly at old jokes, clinking cheap glasses. His reflection looked hollow in the glass. The next morning, James packed a bag. He didn't overthink it, just threw in jeans, sweaters, boots. Something about the quiet in Rosa's voice the night before hadn't left him. It hadn't begged him. It hadn't guilted him. It had simply told the truth. By mid-afternoon, his Range Rover was heading west toward the mountains. The skyline faded, replaced by winding roads and frost-covered trees. The higher he climbed, the more silence wrapped around him. Not the kind he hated, but the kind that held space for something else. Rosa's tiny home appeared around a bend, nestled in a cluster of evergreens. It wasn't tiny in the gimmick sense, just modest, worn, lovingly patched over the years. A handmade wreath hung crookedly on the door. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Wind chimes jingled in the breeze. He hesitated at the end of the gravel drive. Maybe this was a mistake. Before he could back out, the front door opened and Rosa stepped onto the porch, her eyes widening. Then came a smile. Real, soft, a little surprised. "I wasn't sure you'd come." James got out slowly, unsure of what to say. "You were right about the quiet." From inside, children's laughter exploded like a cannon. Someone screamed, "Grandma!" and footsteps thundered toward the door. Rosa turned with a mock scowl. "Inside voices!" "Who's that?" a small voice called out. James took a breath, stepped forward. "I'm just visiting." Then, another figure appeared in the doorway, tall, poised, holding a dish towel. Her brown curls were tied back loosely, her sleeves rolled. She had flour on her cheek and calm in her eyes. Virginia. She didn't smile, just looked at him for a long moment, trying to place him in this setting. James raised a hand, awkward. "Hi." "Hi," she replied carefully. "You lost or something?" Rosa cut in with a laugh. "Virginia, this is Mr. Callahan. He decided to take me up on the invitation." Virginia wiped her hands, nodded. "Well, hope you like noise." He smiled faintly. "I think I need it." As he stepped inside, the smell of cinnamon, wood smoke, and something slightly burnt filled the room. Coats hung on a crooked rack. The couch was patched but soft-looking. A child peeked out from behind a curtain, giggling. This wasn't a place built for show. It was built for staying. And for the first time in a long time, James wasn't sure if he wanted to leave. He wasn't sure of anything anymore, except that he was exactly where he needed to be. The door shut behind James with a gentle click, but the sound echoed in his ears like a slammed gate. Inside Rosa's home, warmth wrapped around him in a way that felt foreign, almost intrusive. The walls were painted in a soft, sun-worn yellow. String lights dangled lazily across the ceiling. Family photos lined a crooked shelf above the couch. The twins' drawings were taped all over the fridge. Crayon stick figures, rainbows, and a shaky rendering of what appeared to be a dancing turkey. Virginia wiped her hands on a towel and crossed her arms. Her eyes studied James like he was a misplaced item in the room. "So," she said plainly, "this is unexpected." James tried to sound at ease. "Well, Rosa invited me. I figured I'd take her up on it." "She also invites the mailman in for coffee when it's cold out," Virginia replied, folding the towel neatly. "Doesn't mean she expects him to move in." Rosa, who had disappeared briefly down the hallway, re-emerged with a basket of laundry and gave her daughter a look. "Virginia." "What?" Virginia's voice softened, but only slightly. "I just want to know how long our guest plans to stay. We're not exactly stocked for company." James glanced toward the front door, then back at her. "A couple days, if that's okay." Rosa gave him a warm nod. "You're welcome here. It's just a little full, that's all. But we're used to squeezing in. We've got 1 sofa, 2 beds, 3 kids, and 0 spare rooms," Virginia added. "So yeah, we squeeze." James managed a polite smile. "I'll try not to take up too much air." The girls came barreling into the living room, giggling, breathless from chasing each other. When they saw James, they froze. One of them whispered loudly, "Is that the man from the picture?" Virginia sighed. "Mia." James blinked. "What picture?" Ella, the bolder twin, pointed to a tablet on the table. "The Christmas fair one, you and Aunt Virginia. You were laughing." He raised an eyebrow. "Laughing?" Mia nodded. "You looked happy. Kinda weird." Virginia snatched the tablet and set it aside, glaring at the twins with a silent warning. James looked at her, amused. "Weird, huh?" "It was just a photo," Virginia said sharply. brushing past him toward the kitchen. People make things up. Rosa watched the tension settle in the air and cleared her throat. James, do you want some coffee? Or tea? Or wine? Wine sounds like the right direction. In the kitchen, Virginia busied herself with preparing dinner, but her movements were just a little sharper, a little faster than they needed to be. She chopped onions with the precision of a surgeon. James leaned against the counter, watching her. "You don't have to pretend I'm not here," he said after a moment. She didn't look up. "I'm not pretending, I'm cooking." "I can leave if I'm in the way." Her knife paused mid-slice. "You're not in the way. You're just surprising." "How so?" "You're the man who once told Rosa to book you a last-minute flight to Dubai because you were bored. And now you're here, in a house where we use space heaters and make popcorn on the stove." James looked around the small kitchen. The counter was chipped, the cabinets mismatched, a calendar with handwritten notes for each day hung by the fridge. "I think I like popcorn," he said. Virginia gave a short, involuntary laugh, but caught herself. "Well, we're out of butter, so you'll have to like it plain." He leaned a little closer. "I can handle plain." She finally looked at him. Just for a second. Her eyes weren't cold, just cautious. Dinner was a blur of laughter, questions, spilled juice, and second servings. Rosa had made chicken and dumplings, and James surprised everyone, including himself, by helping wash dishes afterward. The girls quizzed him on his favorite movie, his favorite Christmas song, and whether he'd ever ridden a horse. "No," he admitted, "but I've bought one." The twins gasped. "You bought a horse and never rode it?" "It was a business thing," he said with a shrug. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," Virginia muttered, drying a dish. That night, James took the sofa. Rosa brought him extra blankets. "Sorry it's lumpy." "I've slept in worse places," Rosa smiled, adjusting a pillow. "You've stayed in penthouses overlooking the ocean." "Exactly. You ever try sleeping with a neon sign flashing in your window?" She chuckled. "Well, here you just get wind and owls." As the house settled, quiet crept in like a gentle tide. James lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of a family. Distant laughter, water running, a door creaking shut. He couldn't remember the last time he fell asleep in a place that felt this alive. In the morning, Virginia was already up, hair tied back, making pancakes while the girls colored at the table. She looked tired, but peaceful. James stepped into the kitchen. "I didn't hear the owls." "Count yourself lucky. They were loud last night." She poured batter into the pan. "You sleep okay?" He nodded. "Better than expected." There was a pause before she added, "You don't look like someone who belongs in a house like this." James tilted his head. "Because I don't complain about the sofa." "Number. Because you're always waiting to leave." Her words hit harder than he expected. He said nothing. She flipped a pancake and added softly, "But maybe not this time." Their eyes met. Just for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Quiet, real, and just beginning to unfold. Snow had started falling by late morning, a quiet, steady hush outside the windows. The hills around Rosa's home were turning white, blanketing the trees and covering the worn wooden steps leading to the porch. Inside, the house buzzed with soft chaos, holiday music crackling from an old speaker, the girls wrapping presents with too much tape, and the unmistakable smell of cookies that were either just about to burn or already had. James stood awkwardly near the dining table, rolling a strip of wrapping paper around a box the twins handed him. It was crooked. The paper tore. Mia let out a theatrical sigh. "You're really bad at this," she said with a shake of her head. "I'm great at delegation," James replied, handing her the roll. "That's a kind of leadership." Ella giggled and grabbed the scissors. "You're like one of those bosses on TV." "I am one of those bosses on TV," he said with a mock-serious tone. "Just worse at bows." Virginia stepped into the room with a basket of folded laundry in her arms. She paused when she saw James kneeling on the floor, tangled in ribbon and scotch tape. A half smile tugged at her lips. "Wow," she said. "This must be what rock bottom looks like." James looked up at her. "I'm building character." She set the basket down and crossed her arms. "You know, they've already wrapped half of those gifts. They told me I was in charge. They also think Santa lives in our attic." James glanced up. "He doesn't?" Virginia rolled her eyes and turned to the girls. "Go wash up for lunch, please. And don't bring glitter to the table again." As the twins raced off, James stood and brushed wrapping scraps from his pants. He caught Virginia watching him. "You're adjusting," she said quietly. "I'm improvising," he replied. "There's a difference." She gave him a long look. "Not to them. They think you're magic." James hesitated, unsure what to say. That word, magic, sat strangely in his chest. He didn't feel like magic. He felt like a man trying not to ruin what little light someone else had made. "They'll get over it," he said finally. "I hope not," Virginia said. "They could use a little more belief in things." Later that afternoon, Aunt Bev arrived with her usual dramatic entrance. Hat askew, arms full of paper grocery bags, and a voice that could cut through a storm. "Who parked the spaceship in the driveway?" she called, stepping inside. Rosa hugged her, laughing. "That spaceship belongs to Mr. Callahan." Aunt Bev turned and gave James a long, assessing look. "So you're the one disrupting our ecosystem?" "Only slightly," he said with a cautious smile. "Well," she said, squinting at him, "you've got a polite voice. That's promising." As the evening rolled in, the cabin grew even cozier. Lamps lit corners with golden warmth. The radio played soft jazz. The kids set up a makeshift talent show using a broomstick as a microphone, and James found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a notepad labeled Judge Number 2. Virginia sat beside him, her legs stretched out, a warm mug of tea between her palms. "You always this good with kids?" she asked quietly as the twins performed a chaotic rendition of Jingle Bells. He shook his head. "Number, I usually just buy them stuff." "And that works?" "Sometimes, until they figure out it doesn't mean anything." Virginia's gaze shifted toward him, thoughtful. "You say that like you know from experience." James didn't answer at first. He watched the girls finish their song and bow dramatically. "I didn't grow up with much warmth," he said finally. "Or magic. My parents were present, but not really there. I spent most of my time around people who were paid to be polite to me." Virginia didn't speak, but her silence wasn't cold. It was listening. "I guess that's why I work so much," James added. "It gives me an excuse not to notice when everything else is empty." She looked at him for a long moment, then offered a soft reply. "That's a heavy thing to admit. I didn't mean to. Must be the tea." Virginia smiled gently, then sipped from her mug. "It's peppermint and trauma. Very effective." They both laughed, quiet, sincere. It felt like the kind of laugh that took weight off the room. After the twins had gone to bed and Aunt Bev had retreated to the guest room with a mystery novel and her nightly chamomile, James lingered in the kitchen while Virginia wiped down the counter. He reached for a dish towel. "Let me help." "You already did dishes yesterday," she said, not looking at him. "I've got momentum." She glanced at him sideways. "You know, you don't have to prove anything here. I'm not trying to." "Then why are you really here?" James set the towel down. "Honestly, I don't know. I just couldn't take another Christmas alone in that condo." Virginia paused, then said softly, "You ever think maybe you were meant to be here?" He looked at her. "Do you?" She hesitated, eyes holding his. "Sometimes life gives you a door. Doesn't mean you have to walk through it. But if you do, maybe don't stand in the doorway." The house settled into deep quiet, the kind only found in mountain cabins, where snow muffles the world and time feels like it pauses to listen. James stayed standing in the kitchen even after Virginia disappeared into the hallway. He stared out the window into the falling snow, heart heavier than it had been in years, but not in a way that hurt, in a way that reminded him he could still feel. The next morning, James woke to the smell of cinnamon and the low hum of voices. The house was already in motion, alive with the quiet clatter of breakfast and the soft sound of feet on creaking floorboards. He blinked against the faint light filtering through the living room curtains, still wrapped in the extra quilt Rosa had given him. For a moment, he just listened. There was something grounding about the noise. It didn't demand anything from him. It just existed. He sat up, stretched, and caught sight of a small note folded neatly on the coffee table. "Coffee's hot. The girls are outside. You're welcome to join. Virginia." He smiled without realizing it. Outside, snow blanketed the yard in smooth, undisturbed layers. The twins were bundled in oversized coats, hurling snowballs at a barely standing snowman, while Aunt Bev supervised from a lawn chair, wrapped in a crocheted blanket like royalty. James stepped out with a steaming mug and nodded toward Virginia, who stood on the porch with her hands tucked in her sleeves. "You're up early," she said, not looking at him. "I couldn't miss the chaos," he replied, sipping. "They've got good aim." "They've been training all year," she said dryly. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the girls run back and forth, their shrieks slicing through the cold like music. James glanced at her, noticing how the soft winter light kissed her cheek. Her curls pulled back in a loose braid, the corners of her eyes crinkling just slightly when she smiled at the girls. "You really built something here," he said, his voice lower now. "A life that feels full." Virginia turned her gaze toward him. "Full doesn't mean perfect." "No, but it means something." She studied him. "Why are you really here, James?" The question again, but this time she didn't sound suspicious. She sounded like she wanted to know the truth. Not to judge it, but to hold it. "I don't know," he said quietly. "At first, it was because Rosa invited me, and because the thought of sitting in that penthouse, pretending I wasn't alone again, made me feel hollow." She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she let on. "But now," he continued, "now I'm not so sure. There's something about this place, about you all, that makes me think maybe I missed something important." Virginia looked away, her breath forming soft clouds in the air. "People always say that when they leave the noise behind. They think quiet is the answer. You think I'm just having a moment? I think you're used to the world revolving around you," she said, gently but directly. "And here it doesn't. Here you're just part of the picture." "That's exactly what I like about it," he said, not flinching. She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on his for a beat longer than they had before. Later that day, the girls begged for a snow fort. James offered to help. At first, he fumbled with the snow like someone who'd never built anything without a contractor. But as the afternoon went on, he laughed harder than he had in years, his jeans soaked, his gloves useless, his heart lighter. Inside, Virginia watched him from the kitchen window, a soft crease forming between her brows. Rosa stepped beside her, drying her hands on a towel. "He's different here," Rosa said, watching her daughter's face. "He doesn't belong in this world, Mom," Virginia whispered. "Maybe not, but he's trying." Virginia looked down, conflicted. Trying isn't always enough. At dinner, the house was loud and full. Aunt Bev was on her third story about the time she accidentally entered a clog dancing competition, and the girls were howling with laughter. James sat next to Virginia, passing rolls and mashed potatoes, trading glances and half smiles between bites. When the meal wound down and plates were cleared, the family drifted into the living room, leaving James and Virginia alone at the table. She turned her mug in her hands. "You don't have to keep performing, you know." He blinked. "Is that what I'm doing?" "I don't know," she said softly. "I just don't want them to get used to someone who's leaving." His voice was steady. "What if I don't want to leave?" Virginia looked at him, really looked at him this time. "I've seen men like you before," she said carefully. "Kind for a weekend, generous for a season. But eventually, the world calls them back, to the city, to the noise, to people who speak their language. And you think I don't speak yours? I think you don't know it yet." James leaned back, silent. "You're good with them," she added, her voice quieter now. "And I see the way you look at all this, like it's a life you could live. But could you really, when the holidays are over, and there's no tree, no cookies, no snow fort, just long days, tight bills, and not enough hours?" He didn't answer. Virginia stood, gathering mugs. "It's okay not to know, but don't pretend." That night, James lay on the sofa, eyes open, heart unsteady. He wasn't pretending, but for the first time in his life, he wished he could fast-forward time, not to get away, but to see if she was still standing there when the rest of the world faded. The morning sun melted parts of the snow into a soft glisten across the front yard. A layer of frost clung to the windows, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the small kitchen. James sat at the table alone, cradling a mug in both hands, staring at the steam like it might offer answers he didn't have yet. Virginia hadn't come downstairs. Rosa moved around the kitchen quietly, slicing fruit, humming something soft and familiar. She didn't press him with conversation. Maybe she could feel the weight in the air too. Finally, she broke the silence. "You sleep all right?" James nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking a lot." Rosa gave him a knowing smile, not looking up from the cutting board. "Well, that's either a good sign or a dangerous one." He smirked faintly. "I'm hoping for good." Before Rosa could respond, the screen door creaked open. Virginia stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold, her curls tucked into a wool beanie. She carried a small basket filled with eggs, holding it like it was heavier than it looked. She paused when she saw James, then gave a small nod. "Morning." "Morning," he replied, sitting up straighter. She walked past him, set the basket on the counter, and peeled off her gloves. Her expression was unreadable, and her silence felt purposeful. James cleared his throat. I was thinking of going into town today." Virginia turned just slightly. "Town? There's a market, right? Maybe I could grab a few things. Help out." She eyed him, skeptical. "You want to shop for groceries?" He shrugged. "Figure I should learn how to buy something other than imported wine and overpriced sushi." Rosa tried to hide her smile as she wiped her hands. Virginia finally relented with a sigh. "All right. You'll need to take my car. Yours'll slide right off our road if it snows again." He stood up. "Deal. What's the damage? Bread? Eggs? Hope?" She handed him a short list, scribbled quickly on a torn envelope. "Don't get distracted by cheese samples and scented candles. Just the list." He grinned. "No promises." The drive into town was peaceful, the roads winding through tall pines dusted with snow. James cracked the window slightly, letting the crisp air hit his face. It grounded him, slowed him down. The general store in town was smaller than most of his closets, but it was warm, bright, and filled with the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon. As he walked the narrow aisles, a few locals gave him curious glances. One older man nodded politely. A younger woman behind the counter whispered something to her co-worker, eyes following him. He could feel it, the low buzz of gossip beginning to stir. He was a stranger here, but not just any stranger, the kind that didn't belong. Still, he smiled, said hello, tried to blend in even though he never really could. Back at the house, Virginia was setting up an old folding table by the front window, decorating it with hand-cut paper snowflakes the girls had made. She wore a sweatshirt speckled with flour and her usual guarded expression. When James returned, she met him at the porch, holding the door open. "Did you get everything?" "I did. Only got distracted once. Bought you a chocolate bar I didn't know you liked." Her eyes narrowed slightly, amused. "You're lucky I do like chocolate." Inside, they unpacked groceries side by side. No one spoke for a while. The air felt thick with unsaid things. Eventually, Virginia broke the silence. "I know it's probably easier to pretend this is just something fun, a break from your world. But I don't want my girls getting attached to someone who's just passing through." James froze, his hand resting on a carton of eggs. He didn't look at her right away. "I'm not pretending," he said quietly. Virginia folded a paper bag with slow precision. "Then help me understand. Because the way you live, the way you've always lived, it doesn't leave space for this." "I didn't know I needed space for this." Her eyes softened, but she didn't let him off the hook. "Needing and keeping are two different things, James." He exhaled, voice low. "I've spent years building a life I thought would fill me. Luxury, freedom, control. But every time I come home, it feels like I'm echoing in a room that doesn't even miss me." She didn't respond. He turned to face her fully. "This place, your family, has more love in one morning than I've felt in entire months of living that other life. You say I'm not made for this world. Maybe I wasn't, but maybe I want to be." Virginia's breath caught. For a second, she let herself feel something. Then, as quickly as it came, she tucked it away. "We've heard that before, you know," she said softly. "People who come through with good hearts and big promises, then leave when it gets hard. I'm not them. Not yet." They stood in silence again. It wasn't angry. It was filled with fear, with hope, with something that looked a lot like risk. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow in golden pinks and dusky blues, James stepped out onto the porch, pulling a knit blanket around his shoulders. Virginia was already there, sipping tea from a chipped mug. He sat beside her, leaving space. After a while, she said quietly, "My sister used to sit here every night. Before she passed, this was her favorite spot." James looked out toward the horizon. She must have loved this view. She did. Said it reminded her that the world could be beautiful even on hard days. He glanced over. "You remind me of that?" Virginia's eyes shimmered with something she wouldn't name. Then she said the words he wasn't expecting, but somehow needed to hear. "If you're going to stay, then stay all the way. Don't halfway your way through this." James nodded. "I won't." And for the first time she believed him. Just a little. Enough to leave the door cracked. Enough to let the next chapter begin. The next few days passed in a rhythm James hadn't known he'd been craving. Morning coffee, scrambled eggs, kids running wild before noon, the creak of floorboards, the hum of a home alive with small, imperfect moments. He'd stopped counting how long he'd been at Rosa's house. For the first time in years, he didn't want to know what time it was. He only cared that when he woke, there'd be laughter behind the door, something baking in the oven, and maybe, just maybe, Virginia still standing beside him on the porch. It was 2 days before Christmas when Rosa mentioned the festival in town. "They do it every year," she said, passing plates across the dinner table. "Lights, carolers, hot cider, small town stuff. But it's sweet." "We usually sing," Mia added, mouthful of mashed potatoes. "Virginia makes us. Even Aunt Bev hums along." "I do not," Bev snapped from her corner of the table, but the smirk gave her away. James looked at Virginia. "Do you sing?" She shook her head, a half smile tugging at her lips. "I supervise. Terribly." "You coming this year?" Virginia hesitated, then nodded. "We always go." James leaned back in his chair. "Then I guess I'll have to make my small town debut." Mia squealed. "You have to wear the hat." "What hat?" "The ugly Christmas hat. Ella gritó. It has antlers. I already regret this, James muttered. But he was smiling. That night, Virginia found him outside again, sitting on the porch swing. A blanket was draped over his lap, a steaming mug of cocoa resting in his hands. You're adapting disturbingly well, she teased. He looked up at her. Should I be worried? She sat beside him, pulling her legs up beneath her. Most people who come here want to leave after a few days. You seem to be settling in. I think I'm starting to understand why you never left. She tilted her head. Why do you think? James looked out at the stars scattered across the cold sky. Because there's something here that the rest of the world pretends to have, he said. But it's real here. Virginia was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, You know this can't be temporary. I know. She turned to him. Do you? He looked at her. Really looked. I'm not here for the holiday escape anymore, he said. I'm here because something in this place, and someone here, is making me question everything I thought I needed. Virginia's breath hitched. James! But whatever she was about to say got caught somewhere between caution and curiosity, and in the space of that pause, something passed between them. Something unsaid, but very much alive. The festival arrived with a kind of small-town magic that no amount of city money could buy. Twinkling lights lined Main Street. Children sang off-key on a makeshift stage. Booths sold handcrafted ornaments and knitted scarves. The air smelled of cinnamon, popcorn, and pine. James walked alongside Virginia and the girls, bundled in borrowed scarves. A ridiculous red hat with antlers bobbing above his head. He should have felt out of place, but he didn't. People stopped to greet Virginia. A man handed her a cinnamon roll with a wink. An older woman hugged her like they'd known each other for years, which, of course, they had. James watched it all unfold like a man watching a life he didn't know he needed, until he was in the middle of it. When they reached the center of the square, the kids ran off to join the others near the cocoa stand. James and Virginia lingered behind, the lights from the tree casting a soft glow over their faces. He leaned a little closer. So, do I pass for local yet? She glanced at him. You look like a lost tourist in a Christmas commercial. Harsh. Honest. James smiled, then grew quiet. Do you ever think about leaving? Virginia looked up, surprised. What? This town, the routines. Ever wonder what it would be like somewhere else? She shrugged. Sure, when the roof leaks or the car won't start. But then I think about the things I'd lose, like the girls running barefoot in the summer, or Mom humming in the kitchen, or Bev's terrible jokes. He nodded slowly. Sounds a lot like home. She met his gaze. It is. A few yards away, someone with a camera took a photo. Quick, unobtrusive, but enough that James noticed. He frowned slightly. Something wrong? Virginia asked. Just someone from the crowd took our picture. They probably thought we were cute, she said, brushing it off. But James couldn't shake the feeling. That night back at the house, he scrolled his phone in the dark, lying on the couch long after the rest of the house had gone quiet. And there it was, on a small local blog called Trina's Corner. A grainy photo of him and Virginia, standing close, their faces softly lit by Christmas lights. Charlotte, millionaire spotted getting cozy in tiny town festival. James stared at it, pulse flickering in his throat. He hadn't thought anyone here would care. He hadn't thought anyone would look. He should have known better. The headline didn't matter, not yet. But he knew the story wasn't going to stay small. And what terrified him more than the blog, more than being found out, was that Virginia had no idea what could come next. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving a thin, glittering crust over the porch railings and the tops of trees. James stared at it through the living room window, but his mind wasn't on the weather. It was on the photo, the blog, the words printed under his face, and Virginia's. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. A friend from Charlotte. Then two more. One of them. "What are you doing up there, James? This some kind of PR stunt?" He turned off the screen and dropped the phone onto the couch like it burned. "Something wrong?" Rosa's voice was soft from the kitchen. He hesitated before turning. "Just saw something online." She stepped into view, drying her hands. "The kind of something that means trouble." James nodded, slowly. "They posted a photo at the festival. Me and Virginia. It's on a gossip site." Rosa's shoulders tensed just enough to show she understood the weight of it. "Does she know?" "Not yet." Rosa paused, folding the dish towel. "James, this town is small, but the internet isn't, and people love stories they think they understand. I didn't think anyone here would recognize me." "Well," Rosa said gently, "you've got a face people recognize, and now you've got feelings for someone who never asked for a spotlight." He sighed and rubbed his face. "I was just happy. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about who I was to the world. I was just being here." She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's a gift, but it comes with the responsibility." Virginia came down the hallway a moment later, her hair still damp from a shower, a fresh sweater tugged over her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him, but the smile faded the second she noticed Rosa's expression. "What's going on?" James stood. "Virginia, we need to talk." The calm in her face flickered. "That never means anything good." He gestured toward the front door. "Can we step outside?" She followed him without a word. The cold hit them fast, biting at their faces. He closed the door behind them, then turned to her, unsure how to say what he needed to. "I need you to know something happened. A photo of us. At the festival. It's online. On some local gossip blog." Virginia blinked, stunned. "What? They didn't use your name. Just mine. But we're both in the shot. And now it's spreading." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "Of course it is." "Virginia, I didn't plan for this. I didn't expect anyone to care. But I'm going to fix it." "Fix it how?" Her voice rose slightly, not loud, but sharp. "With a press release. With some statement about how you were visiting your maid's daughter and it got misconstrued." He winced. "That's not what I'd say. But that's what they'll think. That's what they'll write. And suddenly I'm not a person anymore. I'm a story. A plot twist in the saga of your very public life. Virginia, please." She stepped back, arms crossed. "You said you weren't pretending. But this isn't your world. This isn't your pace. You don't know what it's like to have people question everything about you just because of who you're standing next to." He swallowed hard. "I do know what it's like to be judged. Just maybe not in the same way." She looked at him, her voice lower now. "I worked hard to build a life that wasn't dependent on anyone. Especially not someone who can disappear with a single text and go back to a penthouse like none of this ever happened. I'm not disappearing. You might not mean to, but your world will come knocking. It already is." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, swirling the snow at their feet. James looked at her, unsure of what to say next, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Then the door opened behind them. "Virginia," Rosa called gently. "Aunt Bev's looking for you. Something about the cookie dough being too dry." Virginia nodded but didn't turn right away. She gave James one last glance, full of fear and frustration, and something softer beneath it, something she didn't want to name yet. Then she walked back inside. James remained on the porch, frozen in more ways than one. The photo was just the spark. What came next would be the real test. And he wasn't sure if either of them was ready for the fire. James stayed on the porch long after Virginia went inside. The cold had crept into his sleeves, stiffened his fingers, and numbed his skin. But he didn't move. The words she'd spoken replayed in his head like an echo that refused to fade. You don't know what it's like to have people question everything about you just because of who you're standing next to. She was right. He hadn't lived a life where judgment arrived before conversation, where whispers came faster than truth, where being seen with someone like him might feel like exposure instead of affection. Inside the house, the laughter was muted now. Someone turned on the radio, soft Christmas jazz, and the familiar scent of vanilla and brown sugar wafted through the door. It used to feel like comfort. Tonight, it felt just out of reach. He went inside eventually, quietly, hoping to blend into the background. But Rosa was waiting at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug, watching him with that particular look only mothers possess, the one that sees through politeness. She's hurt, Rosa said gently. James nodded. I didn't want this. I know, she replied, but it's here now. He leaned on the edge of the counter, eyes heavy. What am I supposed to do? Release a statement? Tell the internet it's none of their business? Rosa shook her head. Number, you need to decide what your business is, what you're here for. Because Virginia's not asking for a savior, James. She's asking for someone who won't run when it gets complicated. He exhaled slowly. I don't want to run. Then stand, Rosa said softly, even when it's messy. That night, he barely slept. Every creak of the floorboard, every gust of wind against the siding, felt like a reminder that this place, this world, was fragile, that even good intentions didn't guarantee safety or love. The next morning, the town had changed. Not by much, but enough. At the general store, James felt the difference. The cashier who'd smiled wide at him 2 days ago now glanced away quickly. An older man near the coffee machine narrowed his eyes as James walked past. Outside, a woman snapped a photo with her phone, pretending to check her messages when he caught her. He returned to the car and sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. Then his phone buzzed again. A text from Doug. Saw the blog. You all right? You need me to do damage control? James stared at it, thumb hovering. He typed, Don't touch it. I'll handle it. He didn't know what handle meant yet, but he knew it couldn't come from behind a screen. Not this time. Back at the house, Virginia was in the backyard with the girls, helping them build what looked like a snow sculpture of a reindeer. Ella's mitten had fallen off. Mia had frosting on her face from sneaking cookies inside. James stood at the edge of the porch and watched. Virginia noticed him, but didn't call out. He took a few steps forward, slow, careful. Need help? He asked, stopping just short of the snow pile. Mia perked up. We're making Blitzen. I can see that, he said, smiling gently. Looks like he's had a rough flight. Virginia wiped her hands on her jeans, rising to meet his eyes. She didn't smile. I didn't tell them, she said quietly. About the blog. I figured. I don't want them thinking love makes life harder. James swallowed. Does it? Sometimes, she said. Especially when it's real. They stood there, snow crunching under their boots, the world around them quiet in that winter sort of way. Virginia, he said slowly, I can't control the noise, or the headlines, or how people see us. I know, she replied, but can you handle it when they stop smiling at me in the store? When people wonder if I'm with you for the wrong reasons? When the girls hear whispers they don't understand? He looked at her, not with guilt, but with something deeper. I don't want to be a storm that ruins what you built, he said, but I also don't want to leave pretending like this never mattered. It did matter, she whispered. It does. That's why it hurts. He took a careful step closer. Then let me stay. Not to hide from the noise, but to prove it doesn't decide who we are. Virginia looked at him for a long moment, and in that look, James saw the ache of someone who had always braced for things to end. I need time, she said. He nodded. I can give you that. As the girls called her back to fix Blitzen's tail, she turned, but before walking away, she said one more thing. "Standing still is the easy part, James. It's what you do after that counts." And with that, she returned to the snow, her laughter echoing just a little softer than it had before. But it was still there, and that was enough. For now. It was Christmas Eve, and the house smelled like cinnamon rolls and pine needles and too many candles burning all at once. Aunt Bev had strung popcorn on a thread and draped it around the window like it was a masterpiece. The twins were buzzing around the living room in matching pajamas, singing 2 different holiday songs at the same time. Rosa hummed in the kitchen. Everything felt warm and familiar, except James. He stood at the edge of it all, watching. Present, but not quite inside it. Virginia hadn't said much to him all day. She wasn't cold, not exactly. Just distant in a way that made James question every moment they'd shared. Every laugh, every glance. He'd never felt this uncertain in a room full of people who had, without hesitation, made space for him. He was refilling mugs of cider when the knock came at the door. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a sharp wind through a crack in the window. Rosa opened it with a curious smile, then blinked, surprised. "Well, I'll be." "Doug." James's voice came from behind her, stunned. Doug Harper stepped inside, grinning like he owned the place, scarf tossed casually around his neck. "Merry Christmas, brother. You didn't think I'd let the holidays go by without checking on my favorite recluse, did you?" James stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" Doug looked around the small, bustling house like he'd stepped onto another planet. "I figured I'd see this little getaway for myself. Word's gotten around." James narrowed his eyes. "You flew all the way here because of a blog post?" Doug laughed. "Let's just say your name in a headline tends to catch attention in our circle. A few board members reached out. Some investors are curious." Virginia had stepped into the room now, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Doug glanced at her, giving a once-over that wasn't rude, but wasn't subtle either. "You must be Virginia." "I am," she replied calmly. "And you are?" "Doug Harper. James and I built the company together, and apparently now we share hobbies in small-town tourism." James stepped between them. "Doug, maybe this isn't the time." But Doug wasn't backing off. "It's just funny, man. You disappear from the city, stop answering calls, and then I see you playing house in a cabin in the mountains. Thought I should make sure you hadn't lost your mind." Virginia's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. James exhaled slowly. "Let's talk outside." They stepped onto the porch. Snow was falling again, slow and quiet. Doug stuffed his hands in his coat pockets. "This isn't your scene, James," he said bluntly. "Come on, you know it. You built a life that people would kill for, and you're throwing it away for, what, some schoolteacher with a pretty smile and a Christmas tree?" "Don't," James said sharply. "Don't talk about her like that." Doug raised his hands. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. You got responsibilities, a reputation. You can't just go off the grid and pretend this is your new normal." "I'm not pretending," James said, voice steady. "This is the first thing that's felt real in a long time." Doug scoffed. "You're living in a fantasy? You think she fits into your world? Or that you fit into hers? Eventually something gives. You'll get bored. She'll get tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And you'll both end up hurt." James looked out at the snow-covered trees, jaw tight. "I didn't ask for your opinion," he said quietly. "No," Doug replied. "But I'm giving it to you anyway, because someone has to say it." James didn't respond. He just opened the door and walked back inside. Virginia was standing by the fireplace, pretending not to have heard, but her eyes said otherwise. Doug lingered only a few more minutes, then left, giving a vague, happy holidays that no one returned. After he was gone, the silence in the room stretched like a wire pulled too tight. James sat down on the arm of the couch. "I'm sorry," he said softly. He shouldn't have come. I didn't invite him. Virginia looked at him, unreadable. But what he said, it wasn't wrong, was it? James's chest tightened. I didn't come here to use you, or your family. I came because I needed something real, and I stayed because I found it. I know, she said. Then, after a long pause, but now the world knows too, and I don't get to be invisible anymore. That's not just about you, James. That's about my nieces, my job, my name. He moved closer. I never meant to put you in the middle of that. But I am, she whispered. And I don't know if I can live in a life where I always feel like I'm explaining myself or defending us. James didn't speak. There was nothing to say that would fix it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and endless. Inside, the fire crackled, but the warmth between them had pulled back, uncertain and flickering. Christmas Eve should have been the moment everything came together. Instead, it became the night everything stood still. Christmas morning broke quietly. No excited shrieks, no stampede of footsteps, just the soft crackle of the fireplace and the faint hum of Rosa in the kitchen, humming an old melody while stirring something on the stove. The snow had thickened overnight, draping the trees in soft white and dimming the world like someone had lowered the volume on everything. James sat on the edge of the bed, if you could call it that. It was still the couch, still lumpy, still covered in the same plaid blanket. But it had started to feel like a place he knew, a place he might miss. He rubbed his eyes, then glanced at his phone on the table. No new messages, no calls, no headlines. Still, the quiet wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like the waiting room before something ended. He stood and pulled on a sweater, hesitating a second before stepping into the hallway. The twins were whispering in their room. Aunt Bev was snoring softly behind her closed door. Rosa gave him a small smile from the kitchen as she poured coffee. "Merry Christmas," she said. He smiled faintly. "Morning. Breakfast will be ready soon. You want to help set the table?" He nodded. It felt good to be useful, even now, maybe especially now. The table was set with mismatched plates and cloth napkins that had been ironed neatly. Cinnamon rolls steamed in the center, next to a bowl of fruit and a tin of store-bought butter cookies no one had the heart to hide. But Virginia wasn't there. He noticed it as soon as he walked in. Her chair, empty. Her mug, clean and tucked away on the shelf. "Where is she?" he asked gently. Rosa hesitated, folding a towel in half. "She went into town." "This early?" "She said she needed some space," Rosa said softly, but her eyes didn't judge. "She took her car." James nodded slowly. "Did she say if she'd be back?" "No," Rosa said. "But I think she wanted you to ask that question." The girls finally emerged in their pajamas, carrying hand-wrapped presents made out of recycled shopping bags and tied with bright yarn. Their giggles filled the room, bouncing off the walls like sunlight. James helped pass out cocoa, refilled orange juice, even cracked a joke that made Aunt Bev snort laugh into her biscuit. But he couldn't stop looking at the door. The chair stayed empty. An hour later, after dishes were cleared and the twins were deep into a board game war over who had cheated first, James slipped on his coat and stepped outside. The snow crunched underfoot, quiet and heavy. He didn't know where Virginia had gone, but he knew where he had to go. By late morning, he found himself driving through town, past the square, past the diner where she sometimes brought the girls after school, past the bookstore with the crooked sign that leaned a little more every year. Then he saw her car, parked outside the small-town library. His heart tapped against his ribs like a knock waiting for permission to be answered. He parked, walked up the snowy path and found her inside, sitting on a bench near the window with a notebook in her lap. Her coat was still on. Her coffee was half drunk and cold. She didn't look up when he walked in, but she didn't flinch either. I figured this might be your church, he said, voice soft. Virginia didn't smile. She closed the notebook slowly and looked up. You left the girls on Christmas morning. I didn't come looking for Christmas, he said. I came looking for you. Her gaze dropped. I needed to breathe. I know. James sat across from her, careful not to close the distance too fast. I'm not mad, she said. I'm just tired. He nodded. Of me. Of trying to protect something I don't know how to define. She exhaled slowly. You being here, it's made me feel things I wasn't ready to feel again. Hope. Fear. Like maybe things could be different, but knowing they probably won't be. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When I came here, I didn't plan to stay. I thought I was escaping something, but what I found was everything I didn't know I needed. You, the girls, Rosa, even Bev and her sass. Virginia's lips twitched barely. And now, she asked. Now I want to stop escaping, he said. I want to start showing up. She looked at him, her eyes clearer now. But what does that look like when the blog posts don't stop? When people from your world keep showing up at our front door, judging, measuring, reminding me I don't belong there? He was quiet. Then, it looks like me saying, publicly, that I belong here, with you. Virginia blinked. You do that? I already started writing something, he said. I don't know if it's a press statement or a confession or a Christmas letter to the internet, but it's honest. Her voice softened. What does it say? It says that the best thing I ever built wasn't a company. It was a life I almost missed out on. With a woman who teaches children and raises her nieces and makes cocoa too hot. A woman who doesn't care about my last name or my balance sheet. Just whether or not I show up when it counts. Virginia looked at him for a long time, her breath catching once in her throat. Then she stood, closing the space between them with slow, deliberate steps. You've got a long way to go, James. I know. You're not a small-town guy. I might never be. But, she said, tilting her head, you might be something better. He smiled, hands still in his coat pockets, not daring to touch her yet. What's that? Humbled, she said, her voice barely a whisper, and maybe, just maybe real. He nodded. I'd like that. A lot. She reached for his hand, held it gently, and in that small, quiet library, with snow falling just outside the window, and Christmas still unfolding back home, something between them finally settled. Not perfect, but real, and it was enough, for this moment. For whatever came next. The silence after Virginia's return wasn't heavy, it was steady, like a rhythm found after chaos. Not perfect, but grounding. She hadn't said much when she stepped back through the door that night. Just nodded at James, let her fingertips brush his when she handed him her coat, and disappeared down the hallway, like she needed time to catch her breath. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. Because she'd come back. Now it was morning, and James stood at Rosa's kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold while he stared out the window. Whatever you're thinking about, Rosa said, not looking up from the pan. You might want to write it down before it slips away. He glanced at her. How do you know I'm thinking? You haven't touched your toast in 10 minutes. That's either heartbreak or you're sick. He smiled, then turned serious. She came back. I saw. But I don't want her to just come back. I want her to know this is where I stay, that I'm not going to vanish when the next uncomfortable thing hits. Rosa placed the spatula down. Then tell her, but don't just tell her, show her, loud and clear. He nodded slowly, then pushed his plate away, stood up, and walked back into the living room. He didn't grab a coat. He didn't check his phone. He grabbed his laptop, opened it on the coffee table, and sat down cross-legged on the floor, like he used to when he was broke and dreaming big. Only now, he wasn't chasing a business. He was about to risk his heart. He opened the camera app. No script, no edits, no pretense, just him. And he hit record. "Hi, I'm James Callahan. If you know my name, it's probably not because of a small-town Christmas or a woman named Virginia, but I hope it is soon." He paused, breath unsteady. "I've been in boardrooms. I've built towers. I've bought silence with money and watched it echo in places that were supposed to feel like home. But nothing ever made me feel like I belonged until I found a tiny house in the mountains, until I met a woman who saw through everything I've ever used to protect myself." His voice cracked. He let it. She didn't ask for this attention. She didn't sign up to be a headline, but she loved anyway. Quietly, fully. And I owe her more than any press release could say. He swallowed hard. "So this is me, saying it loud. I'm not in Asheville to hide. I'm here to build a life I didn't know I needed. And if you want to talk about anything, talk about me. Ask me, judge me, but leave her out of it." He looked straight into the lens. "Virginia, if you're watching, I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." He clicked stop. His hands were shaking, but he uploaded the video. No PR team, no captions or filters, just one title, The Real Story. He closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch, heart pounding. Virginia didn't reply that day. She didn't text, didn't knock on the door, didn't even send a niece as an emotional scout. But by that evening, James noticed Rosa scrolling through her phone, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Your video's making rounds," she said. "People are listening." He nodded. "I didn't post it for them." "I know. But sometimes, when you speak from truth, it echoes farther than you think." The house was still again. Still in a way that felt suspended, like a breath held between question and answer. Then the knock came. James opened the door, and there she was. Virginia, hair pulled back, eyes red, jacket zipped up like armor she hadn't decided whether to remove. He didn't speak. She held up her phone. "I watched it," she said, voice low, 3 times. He stepped onto the porch. "And I cried, all 3 times." He exhaled. "I meant every word." She nodded slowly, gaze searching his. "Do you know what it meant?" she asked. "To hear you say my name, out loud, in public, like I was worth defending." James stepped closer, gently. "You are." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I don't want to be a secret, or a season, or a symbol. You won't be. I want someone who knows the cost of staying and chooses it anyway." He reached for her hand. "That's all I want to be." For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The wind moved around them like it was waiting for permission to settle. Then she spoke. "You're not who I thought you were," she whispered. "You're more." He smiled, voice quiet and sure. "Because of you." Virginia stepped forward, and there, on the porch where their story had started, she leaned into his chest, rested her head over his heart, and let the silence wrap around them. Not as something broken, but as something whole. This time, when he held her, he knew she was staying, because he had finally become someone worth staying for. The morning after Virginia walked back through the door, everything felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just steadier, like the house had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. James woke to the sound of soft voices in the kitchen. Virginia and Rosa talking over mugs of coffee. No tension, no heavy pauses. Just the natural rhythm of 2 women who knew how to hold space for life, even the messy parts. He didn't rush downstairs. He wanted to hold on to the quiet for a second longer. Let it wrap around him like proof that last night hadn't been a dream. She'd come back. She'd said okay. She had chosen not to walk away. That meant everything. By the time he joined them, the girls were already pulling on jackets and scarves, chattering about snowmen and sled races, and whether Aunt Bev would let them use the cookie tins as makeshift sleds again. Bev, still wrapped in her quilt like a burrito, muttered from the couch, "Only if someone brings me back a cinnamon roll." Virginia was by the sink tying her hair into a low ponytail. She glanced at James and smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just real. "You're up late," she said. "I didn't want to wake up and ruin it," he replied, sliding his hand around a warm mug Rosa handed him without a word. Virginia tilted her head. "Ruin what?" "This. United States. The quiet between us that doesn't feel like distance anymore." She leaned on the counter, looking at him closely. "You still think it's going to disappear?" "Part of me does," he admitted. "Another part wants to build something that can't." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either, and that was more than enough for now. Later, as the girls ran out into the yard, James pulled Virginia aside near the front porch. "I want to show you something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Now." "Now." He opened the door to his SUV, pulled out a thin, carefully wrapped box and handed it to her. She hesitated. "Is this one of those over-the-top grand gestures you used to be famous for?" He laughed softly. "Not even close." She unwrapped it slowly, her breath catching as she peeled away the last layer. Inside was a hand-carved wooden box. Simple. Raw edges. The grain still visible. On the lid, etched into the surface in uneven amateur lettering, were 5 words, "For what we build together." Virginia opened it. Inside was a small envelope and a tiny, old-fashioned key. She looked up at him. "It's for the cabin," James said. "Not this house. A new one. Down the road just on the edge of the woods. I bought the land, not to show off, but to start small, to build something from the ground up. No contractors, no crews, just me, a couple of local hands and time." Her mouth parted slightly. "You're serious?" "I am." She opened the envelope and pulled out a folded sketch, a rough drawing of a 1-story cabin, with a wide porch and windows on all sides. Nothing fancy, but full of intention. "I don't want a mansion," she said quietly. "Good," he replied, "because I don't want to build one." Virginia stared at the sketch, the key, the box. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked it back. "You really mean to stay," she whispered. "I really do." She stepped closer, voice softer now. "Even when the noise returns? Even when I forget to make coffee? Or the girls leave muddy boots on the floor? Or you realize this life isn't neat and shiny?" He reached for her hand, squeezed it gently. "Especially then." She looked at him for a long moment, then placed the box gently on the porch rail and stood on her toes to kiss him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfectly timed or staged like something out of a movie. It was slow. Sure. Like opening a door that had waited patiently to be used again. Inside, Rosa peeked through the curtain, smiling to herself. Aunt Bev muttered, "Took 'em long enough." The girls came crashing back inside minutes later, cheeks red, scarves half untied, and eyes wide. "Mama," Ella panted, "we found a raccoon near the woodpile. We named him Gerald." Virginia pulled her hair back with a sigh. "Please tell me you didn't feed him." "Just one cookie." James glanced at her with a grin. "We're really doing this, huh?" "Gerald's part of the family now," Virginia deadpanned. "You still in?" James looked around, at the chipped kitchen cabinets, the burst of laughter from the girls, the way Rosa hummed like peace was her native language. He nodded. "I'm all in." And this time, every word he said was already rooted in something deeper than plans or promises. It was rooted in love, the kind that grows quietly, but doesn't let go. The snow had mostly melted by the second week of January, revealing patches of brown grass and stone along the hills. The wind still carried winter's edge, but the town had begun to thaw, not just in weather, but in spirit. And so had James. Each morning he woke earlier than he used to. No alarm, just the sound of pans clinking in Rosa's kitchen and the muffled giggles of the girls getting ready for school. He made coffee now. Not always well, but he tried. He swept the porch without being asked. He answered emails only after breakfast and never during conversation. But the most unexpected thing? He didn't miss the life he left behind. Not the skyline views. Not the boardroom buzz. Not the way people used to listen only because of his last name. Here, he was just James. And that was finally enough. It was Virginia who noticed first. "You seem settled," she said one morning as they stood on the porch, watching Ella and Mia chase each other to the bus stop. He looked over at her, hands in his coat pockets, steam curling from his mug. "I think I am." She tilted her head. "You're still checking your phone." He smiled. "I'm not dead, but I'm not chasing anything anymore. Not the noise, not the headlines." Virginia turned to face him. "You're becoming someone I can picture in this life, not just visiting it." He took a breath. "I want to do more than just picture it." Her brow lifted slightly. "Oh?" James stepped closer, pulled out a folded flyer from his coat pocket, and handed it to her. She opened it slowly. "Western Carolina Education Fundraiser, Local Talent Showcase, Community Dinner, and Teacher Grant Launch." Her eyes snapped to his. "I've been working with the school board," he said, quietly. "I didn't want it to be about me." She blinked. "You're starting a grant program?" "For teachers," he nodded. "For supplies, class projects, field trips, whatever they need." "James, it's not charity," he said, voice firm but gentle. "It's a thank you for the people who never stopped showing up, even when no one noticed. People like you." Virginia's voice dropped to a whisper. "You did this. For me. I did it because of you, because of what I've seen through your eyes." She looked down, then back up, her voice trembling. "You know this is going to change things again, right? People will start talking again, asking questions, making assumptions." "I know," he said. "But this time, I'm ready to answer them." That night, Rosa made chicken pot pie, and Aunt Bev brought over her infamous peach cobbler, which James had learned was her way of showing approval. They all gathered around the table, the kind of meal that didn't need to be perfect because it was real. After dessert, while the girls worked on a puzzle in the living room, and Bev pretended not to nap mid-sentence, James took Virginia's hand. "Come with me." She let him lead her outside, down the small path behind the house, through the trees where the moonlight poured silver on the forest floor. At the edge of the clearing, a small wooden stake stuck out of the ground with a ribbon tied around it. Virginia looked at it, confused. James gestured around them. "Here, this is where the cabin will go." Her breath caught. "You picked the spot." "I wanted it to be close enough to your mum's, but far enough that we'd have space, privacy, but not distance." She stared at the trees, then back at him. "You've thought about all of it." "I have." "What about permits, construction? You can't build in the winter." "I've already started lining it up. Not a crew from Charlotte, local builders, small team. I'll be working alongside them." She blinked. "You?" He grinned. "I know how to swing a hammer. Sort of." She stepped into him, wrapped her arms around his waist. He held her there, chin resting on the top of her head. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I'm proud of us," he said. They stood like that for a long time, letting the cold settle around them, letting the moment breathe. And then Virginia said something that surprised them both. "I want to be part of the build." He leaned back, smiling. "You're volunteering to measure floorboards." "I'm volunteering to build our future, with my own 2 hands." He kissed her forehead, his voice quiet. "Then we'll build it together." As they walked back through the woods, hand in hand, the lights from Rosa's house flickered through the trees like a lighthouse in the dark. James glanced at it, then at the woman beside him, and knew, with absolute clarity, he had finally arrived at the only destination that ever mattered. Home. The first frame of the cabin went up on a Tuesday morning, under a sky brushed with soft grey and streaks of hopeful blue. Frost still kissed the tips of the grass, but James didn't feel the cold. Not when he had a toolbox in his hand and Virginia beside him, sleeves rolled up, hair tucked beneath a knitted beanie, laughing as she tried to figure out which end of the level was up. "You're holding it upside down," he said, stepping behind her, gently flipping it over. She smirked. "Maybe I like the world a little off balance." He leaned in, brushing her shoulder with his. "You're lucky I'm finally learning how to measure things right." They laughed, and for a second it was easy to forget that less than a month ago, they'd been strangers orbiting two very different worlds. Now, they were hammering a foundation into the dirt. The local builder, Carl, watched them with mild amusement, a quiet man with hands like tree trunks and the patience of a saint. "I've seen a lot of couples build homes together," he said during their first lunch break, wiping his hands on a worn towel. "Not all of them last through it." James raised an eyebrow. "We're not exactly typical." Carl nodded. "Number. But that's probably why you've got a shot." The cabin grew slowly, piece by piece. James poured himself into every detail. He wanted his hands in the work, not because it made the build faster, but because it made it real. They kept it simple. One bedroom, a reading nook tucked by the window for Virginia, a wide porch for quiet mornings and louder evenings, a kitchen that faced the woods. James insisted on adding a small fireplace, even if it stretched the budget. "We'll need it," he said, "for the cold days." Virginia smiled. "You're planning for storms now?" "I'm planning to stay through them." A week later, James found the girls sitting in the middle of the future living room, tracing shapes into the sawdust-covered floor. "What are you doing?" he asked, crouching beside them. "We're designing the magic rug," Mia said seriously. "Ella Arcintio. It's invisible now, but when the house is done, it'll be where all the hugs happen." James blinked, caught completely off guard. "Can I sit on it too?" he asked. They nodded in unison. "Only if you promise to use it a lot." He held up a hand like a vow. "Deal." The day the windows went in, Virginia stood inside the frame of what would be their front door, staring out at the clearing. The air was cool but gentle, the kind that makes you pause mid-breath just to feel it. James came up behind her, resting a hand lightly on her waist. "Picturing furniture already?" She shook her head. "Just the future. Not the stuff in it. Just the space. What it'll sound like when the girls come running through after school. What it'll smell like when we burn toast or make pancakes at midnight." He smiled against her hair. "What it'll feel like when we're sitting on the floor, exhausted, but home." She turned to face him, her voice low. "You sure you're ready for all of it? For the noise, the mess, the Tuesday night homework chaos?" "No," her eyes held his. "For the parts where it's not fun, when you forget to put the lid back on the coffee, when I get overwhelmed, when we disagree and there's nowhere to run." James didn't blink. "Yes." "Why?" she whispered. "Because I want the whole thing," he said. "Not just the highlight reel. I want the early mornings, and the late night talks, and the quiet in between. I want to fail sometimes and still be here. Still choose this." Her eyes filled but didn't spill. "Okay," she whispered. That night, the stars came out clearer than usual. James built a small fire just outside the cabin's shell, and they all sat around it. Rosa in her usual shawl, Aunt Bev with a mug of cider, the girls wrapped in 2 blankets, giggling at nothing and everything. James passed Virginia a marshmallow on a stick. She held it over the fire, watching it turn gold. "You know," she said, "a few months ago, I thought I had everything I needed. A rhythm, a roof, love in small doses. And now?" he asked. She looked at him. "Now I know I needed more. Not louder, not bigger, just deeper." He took her hand, lacing their fingers. I came here to get away, he said quietly. But what I really did was arrive. The fire crackled. The girls started singing a made-up song about Gerald the raccoon and how he stole cookies but returned them with apology notes. Everyone laughed. And James knew, in the flicker of that firelight, that this circle, this life, this place, was the only empire he'd ever cared to build. Not one of glass towers, but of wood, warmth, and hearts that didn't walk away. The first signs of spring came with the scent of wet pine and wild daffodils. The snow melted slowly, but the ground had already started to loosen its grip on winter. The tiny clearing where James and Virginia's cabin stood was now surrounded by soft mud, budding branches, and the unmistakable hum of something beginning again. It was early morning, the kind where breath still fogged the air and birdsong felt like a whisper just waking up. James stood barefoot on the unfinished porch, coffee in one hand, a folded letter in the other. The cabin was still a work in progress. Half-painted trim, a back door that creaked too much, tools still leaning in corners like forgotten conversations. But it was theirs, every inch of it. A home shaped by hands, arguments, laughter, compromises. Nothing about it was perfect, but it was honest. And that had become the most important thing. Behind him, Virginia moved in the kitchen, humming under her breath while packing lunches. Ella and Mia were getting dressed for school upstairs, loudly and without urgency. Rosa had just pulled up in her car, honking once like she always did when she wanted someone to come grab her bags, but refused to say so. And today was the day. James looked down at the letter again. It was addressed to the town, no one in particular, just folded neatly, written in his handwriting, and printed on plain white paper. He had asked the local newspaper to publish it. No headlines, no editorials, just words, his words. Because something about closing this chapter, really closing it, meant being seen, fully. No polish, no PR. The screen door creaked open behind him. Virginia stepped out, barefoot too, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her cheek against his back. "You okay?" she asked. "I am now," he said. She squeezed him once, then stepped beside him, looking out toward the garden patch they'd started clearing together. There wasn't much growing yet, but they had plans. Tomatoes, herbs, peppers, a lemon tree in a pot that probably wouldn't survive the first frost. But James had insisted they try anyway. "I sent it," he said finally. Virginia didn't ask what. She already knew. "I think you'll be proud of it. I already am." They stood there for a few minutes, neither saying anything, just sharing air, light, quiet. Then Virginia turned, gently tugging on his hand. "Come on, you promised you'd help braid Ella's hair. She insists you're the only one who can do the double twist thing now." He laughed. "That's because I bribe her with cookies." She kissed his cheek. "Bribe or not, that's love." James followed her inside. The house smelled like toast and cinnamon. The kind of scent that didn't come from a recipe, but from a rhythm. Lives overlapping, routines forming, small things becoming sacred, without anyone noticing. He helped Ella with her hair, poorly but with great effort. He tied Mia's shoes because she insisted her fingers were too sleepy. He grabbed Virginia's travel mug and filled it just the way she liked. Half coffee, half almond milk, no sugar, no talking before the first sip. As they all spilled out the front door and into the car, James leaned down to kiss Virginia, quickly, softly. Not like a grand gesture, just a habit, the good kind. "Be careful driving," he said. She smirked. "You sound like a husband." He blinked, then, very quietly, said, "Maybe I should be." She froze for a second, a smile playing at the edges of her mouth. Then she leaned in, whispered something in his ear that made him laugh, and climbed into the driver's seat. He watched them pull out of the driveway, heart full and quiet. Later that day, James walked into the local school gym, where the fundraiser dinner was already being set up. Fold-out tables lined with checkered cloths, crockpots plugged into extension cords, paper signs announcing pie auctions and teacher raffles. This was what mattered now. He spotted Trina, the blogger who had first posted about him and Virginia, setting up a booth for her homemade honey. He walked up to her. "Hey." She looked up, surprised. "James Callahan, in the flesh." "I saw what you wrote last week," he said, "about the grant fund." Trina nodded. "You earned that one." James paused, then offered her a warm, real smile. "Thanks for seeing the whole story, not just the beginning." She returned the smile, then handed him a jar. "On the house. Try it on cornbread." "Deal." The dinner began slowly. Families trickled in, teachers chatted. The twins ran around with juice boxes, making bets on how many pies Aunt Bev would accidentally win. Rosa danced with a man from her church, and Virginia, Virginia, stood in the corner of the room, wearing a soft green dress that matched nothing in the room but everything about the night. She walked toward him slowly. "Everyone keeps asking me," she said, tucking a curl behind her ear. "If we're official, if you're staying." James chuckled. "What did you tell them?" She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I said I think we're just getting started." James pulled her close, right there in the middle of that drafty gym, surrounded by people folding napkins and refilling crockpots. "Then maybe it's time I made it more official." Virginia blinked. "What are you—" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny hand-carved box. Not velvet, not store-bought, something he'd made with Carl's help. Inside was a simple ring, a single stone, nothing flashy, but everything true. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need to. "I want to keep building this life with you. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. And because when I wake up next to you, the world makes sense again." Virginia didn't cry. Not at first. She just nodded. Once, twice, then whispered, "Yes, yes, absolutely." They didn't kiss dramatically. They just held each other. Long enough for the girls to notice, long enough for Aunt Bev to shout something about finally getting to wear her backup dress. Long enough for the gym to erupt into applause. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, James and Virginia stood outside the cabin again. The stars were out. The wind had gone still. And James looked around at the house they had built, the family they had become, the woman beside him who had changed everything, not with noise, but with presence. "You know what I've realized?" he said quietly. "What?" "That I didn't escape to this place," he said, voice breaking slightly. "I arrived here, finally." Virginia leaned her head on his shoulder. "And by the end," she whispered, "you didn't just find a home, you became one." He didn't answer. He just held her. And in that stillness, under those stars, with nothing left to chase and everything ahead to build, James finally felt whole. Not because the world had given him peace, but because he'd made it. Right here. With her.